السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. We begin in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal by asking him to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. May his peace and blessings be upon him and his family. It's wonderful to be with everyone today, mashallah. I hope everyone had a nice 4th of July holiday, spent time with your family, friends, loved ones. Inshallah ta'ala, it was of great benefit. I can ask the sisters if you guys would like to come forward. I know we usually have like a little section here, and I'll ask the brothers to just move over to my left a little bit. Yeah, you can just open it up so the sisters can come, inshallah. Thank you, boys. Oh, careful. Yeah, we can have one. So alhamdulillah, as you all know, over the last it's been actually almost a month and a half, 2 months now, we've been covering the lives of the Khulafa Rashidin. We're going into actually very high level Islamic history and then getting into some of the lessons that we can gain from that particular history. So we've covered up until now the lives of Abu Bakr, not the lives, but the Khilafah, I should say, of Abu Bakr, of Umar, and we started with Uthman, and then we had a couple of we got derailed into conversations last time, which was all good discussion, alhamdulillah. But I wanted to close out the Khilafah of Uthman and get into the Khilafah of Ali. Now the reason we're talking about this is because from a historical standpoint, it's important for us to understand what was happening politically, just politically at the kind of at the governance level. Inshallah, what we'll discuss starting hopefully next week is what was happening on the ground with the Muslims. So on one level, we're discussing kind of politically what was happening with the Muslims in terms of their expansion and the territories and new people coming into Islam. And then we'll talk specifically next week about the development of Islamic legal theory. Because the institution of the madhabs and the institution of the Quranic schools was something that was happening independent of the politics. So you had political rulers, and this is, by the way, throughout Islamic history. You have people in rulership over a Muslim empire, a large Muslim empire. But what they do is not necessarily in accordance to what the people themselves are vying authority in. Many of the scholars that you and I know, whether it's Imam al-Awza'i or Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik or Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, these were not rulers in any shape or form. They didn't have an army behind them. They didn't have governorship. But they had something more valuable, which was the authority of the people. When somebody needed to know how to make wudu properly, they didn't go to the Khalifa. They went to the scholar. They went to the person of knowledge, who would then teach them how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. That's very, very different than how things worked, oftentimes, especially in the Christian, kind of Christendom, if you will, the expansionary of the Christian polities, and in other places. Right? So you have this kind of, Islam of course spread, but we'll talk a little bit more about what Muslims developed as institutions. And as we get into in the future, the development of the Banu Umayyah and the Umayyads and the Khilafah of the Abbasids and the Khilafah of the Banu Umayyads, the Umayyads in Spain and in other places, we'll begin to see this time and time again. So, what we'll discuss today, inshallah, I wanted to just recap from the life of Uthman ibn Affan. His Khilafah specifically. I mentioned this just last week. Some of the things that Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu had to deal with was by the time his Khilafah, we had a massive expansion of the caliphate during the time of Umar ibn Khattab. That continued during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, including, as I mentioned here on the slide, the first naval fleet that the Muslim army ever created to go into Cyprus and into other areas was under the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan, right? And the Muslims were kind of in this expansionary phase. Now, interesting, one of the brothers last week brought up, why were Muslims expanding so much? Why didn't they just kind of stay in and around Mecca and Medina and live there. I did some research on this, and I just wanted to share this with the brothers and sisters who are here. There's a scholar by the name of Hugh Kennedy. Hugh Kennedy. He's a Muslim historian, or he's a historian of Muslim history. So he's not Muslim himself, to my knowledge. But he's done a really, really incredible analysis of Islamic history in the early phases, in the early Islamic period. And he has a book called The Great Arab Conquest. Actually, a really good book for those that are interested in how the Muslims were able to expand so quickly into parts of Africa and those areas. It's great. But he mentions a couple of factors as to why the Muslims were able to take such great expanse of territory in such a short period of time, basically within the first 100 years. And I wanted to share that with you. Number one, he mentions the Byzantine and the Sasanian exhaustion. So the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire, which are the two major empires at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had started to dwindle. There was internal strife, there were religious divisions, and there was even a plague that had wiped out entire parts of the territory and populations in those areas. So you have this factor of just, in general, there's a weakening of these neighboring states. Number two, he mentions Arab motivations and strengths. So Arabs were by and large a nomadic people. They were Bedouins. They could travel very, very quickly on land. And that was something that it actually worked in their favor as they started expanding into different territories. There was military generals like Khalid bin Walid, for instance, and others, Amr ibn al-As and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, very famous, very intellectual military stratagems that were being employed. There was also a high religious fever and fervor to say, hey, we want to go and really spread Islam, make sure Islam is dominant. So that was, he mentions that as being one of the motivations as well. And then there's economic factors, and I think we talked about this last time. No empire is going to survive on a going bankrupt. They have to be able to sustain the treasury. And the way that you do that in the pre-modern world was you took advantage of the resources that you took over. So as you expanded land and territory, those resources became yours. That then bankrolled and paid for the empire as it started to expand. And then he also mentions the unification of Arabia. In general, that was something that was not done prior to the Prophet ﷺ. Prior to the Prophet, you had different Arab tribes that were kind of interspersed all around, but they weren't unified. Islam actually brought them unity, and Hugh Kennedy mentions this. This Islamic ideology and this religion gave people a sense of unity that they didn't have before. And they were able to then take advantage of it. Now, one of the things, yes, do you have a question? Yes, and that does happen later in the empire. At this phase, they don't have that issue, but at some point an empire gets too big that it can no longer, even the expansionary policies, because you have to pay for soldiers. You have to pay for soldiers, you have to pay for artillery, you have to pay for, all of these things are not sustainable after a certain degree. So there's a point of there's a point of balance in which what you're taking in is, and what you're putting out it's even, and then you have a law of diminishing returns that comes into place. At this point in the Islamic history, that isn't the case. That will become the case later. And then the last thing I'll just mention here that he mentions is, as conquerors, the Arabs were very, very practical, very pragmatic. They would oftentimes co-opt local resources and put them into positions of power. Many people don't know this, but the official language of the caliphate was not Arabic until the reign of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who is decades after what we're talking about here. So for the first 70 or 80 years of the Khilafah, the official language of the caliphate was not Arabic. I think we discussed this in a previous class. Why? Why is that the case? Why wouldn't the official language of the caliphate have been Arabic for the first 70 or 80 years? Idris. The multicultural empire, right? Think about it. They're conquering areas that are not Arabic speaking. And they have local people there that don't speak Arabic. Their records for their property are not kept in Arabic. Their records for their marriages and things like that are not kept in Arabic. They are kept probably in Byzantine, especially for the places in and around Syria, or in Persian, as they get into the Persian Empire. Right? So you have this very kind of pragmatic. If they had instituted Arabic for all record keeping from day one, there would have been riots, because people would not have understood what the people are even asking for. Muslims were very pragmatic when it came to this in the early stages. And that, subhanAllah, you see this actually with other rulers as well. The ones that were able to do that ended up having empires that lasted much longer. The Ottomans did something very, very similar. They didn't mandate Turkish as the official language for the entire Ottoman Empire. If they did, much of the Muslim world today would be speaking Turkish. But they allowed the nascent languages in those areas to exist. In fact, Hugh Kennedy makes a point that the only reason we even know that the Arabs spread as far as they did is because North Africa speaks Arabic today. They didn't speak Arabic back then. I mean, even when you guys who studied ancient Egypt in school before? You guys have studied it before? What language did they speak in ancient Egypt? Yeah, they kept records by what? Hieroglyphics. Right? Hieroglyphics is how they didn't do it in Arabic. Right? So Egypt was not an Arabic-speaking. It is today, especially if don't tell an Egyptian they don't speak Arabic, right? It is definitely Arabic-speaking today, but that all came after Islam. So I wanted to just say that they were very practical as rulers. And during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, we begin to see this. As the territory is expanding, there's local people that are coming into kind of power, and the governorships, the people ruling, are still Muslim. But the awam, the general public, may not be. Okay, so let's get into today. And then, of course, I mentioned the last point, or one of the last points here. Also is the Uthmani Quran today is credited, that script, that one mushaf that we have, end to end, that script in that mushaf is credited during the time of Uthman ibn Affan, where he basically obliterated any other lexical scripts that were out there and said this is going to be the one standard script for reading from the Quran. And all of the 7 qira'at that the Prophet ﷺ brought, or that was given to him by Jibril alayhi salam, all of them are found in this script. You can use the Uthmani script to read any of those 7 qira'at. Right? So this was another one of his accomplishments. Now, something we did not have a chance to get to last week was by the end of Uthman's reign, there started to be a lot of internal turmoil and friction. In fact, there were resistance movements against his khilafah. And I think I read to you guys some of the complaints that they had last week. Right? They complained that he put people in charge that the rioters or the rebels themselves did not feel were very, there was a lot of nepotism. Hey, you're just appointing your relative in power instead of the person most qualified. And Uthman ibn Affan actually listened to their complaints, and he one by one deconstructed them. Right? But you could tell that there was dissent. Now, interestingly enough, Shah Najib Abadi in his History of Islam, he talks about a particular man by the name of Abdullah ibn Saba, who is, in Islamic history, often seen as the one that caused a lot of these problems, because he was going around trying to basically take down the Khilafah, right? And he would garner support and get people rioted and get people rebel, and he was really in charge of stowing a lot of animosity against the Khilafah, against the Khalifa, right? And as I was reading and researching about this, subhanAllah, it gave me pause about misinformation that we have available today. You can go on the internet and get all kinds of information about situations that are not true, especially now with AI. They can literally take scholars or credible newsworthy sources and completely doctor them so that they're saying something totally false. This was actually very similar to the patterns that some of these writers used. They decided to start creating rumors and creating problems with the things that were happening in the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan, and then people started latching onto that. And people started saying, yes, this is right. How dare he do this? Why can he do this? And they got very, very, very flustered. they almost created their own narrative. Almost created like their own narrative about what was going on. Right? And as such, it just fueled this passion within this very fervent group of individuals who said, no, we need to do away with the current Khalifa. And we need to replace the current Khalifa with somebody else. Some of them believed it should be Ali. Some of them believed it should be Talha or Zubayr. They had difference of opinion on who should be the Khalifa. But they all, a group of them, a very sizable group of them from different parts of communities, decided that they were going to overthrow, basically do a coup of Uthman. I'm not going to give you all the details, and anybody who's interested can read the details in the book or in many of these books. But at the end of the day, recognize this. Uthman ibn Affan is killed in his home, in Salah or after Salah, reading Quran, and murdered as a Khalifa. That's undisputed in our tradition. How it went down, who was there, that's sometimes disputed. One of the things that's very interesting when I was reading this was one of the people who was actually a rebel initially was Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, the son of Abu Bakr. So he had also got caught up in this fervor that the Khalifa needs to be overthrown. This Khalifa, he needs to step down, essentially. And he goes to Uthman ibn Affan, he says, we are asking you to step down. Uthman ibn Affan says, I will not step down from an authority that has been granted to me by Allah and His people. Right? Like, in other words, I'm not going to step down just because you're telling me to step down. Like, this was a mantle that I took responsibility for, and I'm going to do that. And at some point, he said something to the effect of, you know, you are not worthy of, during the reign of my father, we didn't see the types of problems that you're seeing today. And he responded, if your father were alive, he would be standing here with me. And at that point, it was said that Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr said, when he invoked his father's name like that, he recognized what he was doing was wrong, and he actually stepped away from the rioting and the reveling. So he leaves. Now, unfortunately, at that point, other groups of rioters had already come in. They end up murdering Uthman ibn Affan. And so the Khalifa himself, now, for the first time actually, now you recall Umar, he was also killed, but he was killed by a non-Muslim. Here now you have this internal strife and friction that's happened such that the Muslims or people that profess Islam are the ones that end up killing Uthman ibn Affan. And he is martyred in that sense. It says that the rebels eventually invaded Medina, forced their way into Uthman's home, and murdered him as he sat reading Quran. Now, one thing I just wanted to note here, while we're talking about the Quran, I think I may have showed this picture last time, but this is known as a Samarkand manuscript. It's in Tashkent today in Uzbekistan, and it's believed to be the Quran from the time of Uthman ibn Affan. Yes? You're from Tashkent, mashallah. That's amazing. No, subhanAllah. Thank you for sharing that. So it does exist. It is there in a museum today. Just out of curiosity, in the museum, I remember going to the Topkapi Palace, and where they had manuscripts of Quran, they always had Quran recited. It was like constantly going. I don't know, do they do the same in Tashkent? Not that you've seen? Okay. It was very interesting. For those that have been to the Topkapi Palace, you've probably seen that. Yeah?
It's kept in a smaller building. It used to be actually a madrasa.
Oh.
The madrasa is called the Madrasa Ibn Mubarak.
Okay.
And it's located right near a very famous masjid. The masjid is built relatively recently. It's named after one of the greatest of the fuqaha of the earliest of times. He was the one who spread the Hanafism in that area.
SubhanAllah.
His name is Kafal Shashi.
Wow.
So this madrasa it's a very small building, and it's only this Quran which is in that building.
Mm.
And along with that, there are certain other manuscripts. And also what happened was that in
Uzbekistan, yeah.
Uzbekistan, they have taken this Quran to St. Petersburg.
Oh,
And it was in 1905 when they reproduced copies of this Quran. And most of the copies that, like you see photographs of this,
yeah.
those are copies, those are from that particular copy of the Quran, not the original.
Not the original, okay.
If you look at it, it's on leather.
Okay.
And I have photographs also, but some very nice photographs of this Quran. Because I visited a
Yeah, yeah.
place, and it's right in the middle. And normally you're not allowed to photograph this Quran, but you can photograph
The copies of it?
Are in the back. And what's on display is not the Quran. And this Quran, which is there, the history is that it is said that when Timur
Yeah.
invaded and he occupied the Ottoman territory,
Yeah.
he brought this Quran from the Ottoman territories over to this place. So it's not for sure whether this is the complete Quran, because
Yeah.
also the copy which is in book copy is probably a part of the same.
Of the same one. Interesting. Okay.
So it is the Soviets later on when they gave this Quran back to Uzbekistan, and it was brought back and it's in this place. Another thing is that when Timur originally brought this Quran, this was actually kept in Samarkand. If you go to Samarkand, the largest mosque there is called it's named after the wife of sorry. Exactly.
Oh.
So it's right in the main courtyard.
Yeah.
There is a very huge rahel, you know, the big rahel.
Yeah.
So that's where this Quran used to be kept. It used to be out in the open.
Out in the open. Oh.
Enclosure, but it was not air-conditioned kind of space.
Yeah.
And now, of course, it is.
It's in the. SubhanAllah, I'm glad that they're preserving it, right? Because sometimes we don't value kind of what the historical tradition is, but it's wonderful that they're preserving this, SubhanAllah. So. It's huge, yeah, yeah. I've seen pictures. Oh wow, really? Wow, it could have been the one. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's going to have stains. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But the dating of it is during the time to the time of Uthman. That's what I've heard. Yes, did you have a question too? It's carbon dated. Yeah, it's carbon dated. Yeah. So most of these things they didn't usually put dates on those things. Well, some of the later ones did, but this copy's been carbon dated to the time of Uthman. That's a good question. I don't know.
Well, you see that, let me answer it in a different way. You see, the Arabic texts had not been properly developed at that time. And if you look at the text of this Quran, it does not have the dots. It does not have the fatha or makasra.
Yeah.
Like even you cannot distinguish between the noon and the ba or the ya.
Yeah.
So because of which you could read it technically in different ways. It's only several decades later when those
Yeah.
marks, diacritical marks, as well as the dots, etc., were developed. But generally, if you look at this text of the Quran, compare it with any of the other texts,
It's not going to look the same.
add the dots and
Yeah.
etc., it's going to be following.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very important point actually, because the diacritical marks or the dots that you're saying, that actually comes during the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, much later. So the Mus'haf, even that Uthman had put together, or during his time, that was what it was. The words. I don't know how to explain this. It was the words, but without the dots and the diacritical marks, the fatha, the makasra, like you mentioned. But the script was the same, just to make sure that the script was going to be identical, kind of across different areas.
Also, this script is the earliest of scripts. It's even before the Kufi scripts.
Yes, before the Kufi ones.
It's not easy to read it.
Yeah, 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 it's true. So yeah, it's just, I mean, this is part of the legacy of Uthman, right? I mean, we see it every day when we're reading Quran, right? This is part of that legacy from his time. And it was a great service that he did, that he made one script so that we could build off of that. And now you can go anywhere in the Muslim world and pick up a copy of the Mus'haf and be able to read the Quran. I mean, this is, believe it or not, I know that it sounds Like, yeah, of course you can do that, but no other religious tradition can you do that. None. You can't pick one up. You can't, you have a King James version of the Bible and you've got other ones, right? But if you go to different lands and different places, those are translations of which it's not the original script. Maybe with some of the Torah that may be applicable, but other than that, this is unique to our tradition that whether I'm in Malaysia or I'm in North Africa or I'm in Canada, it's all the same mushaf, right? Everywhere. Yes, brother. So that's all done by dating. So, it's interesting because I think one of the things that we have to realize is that the Quran itself was something that was preserved in the hearts of people. Before it was preserved, I know we had this discussion last time too, but before it was preserved on paper, it was preserved here. And so, people that are kind of like, oh, is this the original one that came down? Is it from that time? Really, the best we can do is do the carbon dating to figure out what's the time period that this leather and this ink is from. Whether or not it's the original is actually irrelevant in the fact that thousands upon thousands of Muslims had it memorized and have had it memorized for the 1400 years, millions now, right? So one of the things that Karen Armstrong and all of these Orientalist kind of teachers now, none of them challenge the fact that the Quran is as it was at the time the Prophet ﷺ died. So even Orientalists, they're like, no, we don't argue that point. Previous people used to argue that, but the research has shown this is, if there was anything changed, it might have been done in his lifetime, but at the time of his death and beyond, it has been unchanged. Yeah. It was through memory. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every single teacher. It is the most extensive pre-modern footnoting system in the world. Yeah. And by the way, prior to modern times, most people that got an ijazah memorized the ijazah. So it wasn't just that you had it written down on a piece of paper. You could go, and I remember, subhanAllah, when I was studying this with the Sheikh years ago, he gave us his whole sanad. And it was like, I don't know, 30 generations up. But he knew the name of every single person and the year that they died, right? Like, it's all part of the sanad. So this is we could actually do a whole class on Quranic preservation. Yes. Yeah. It's exactly. And we should probably do, for those that are interested, we could do a class on the preservation of the Quran. Ingrid Mattson has a great book called The Story of the Quran where she talks about the preservation. I wanted you to just place the context that it was during the time of Uthman that it became, hey, we need to make sure that this is something that's going to be there for progeny. And it ended. Okay, let me, I know we have, I'm going to try to wrap this up a little bit early today, but let's talk about the reign of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So Ali is, the people that were against Uthman, many of those rebels ended up saying that, well, we would rather have Ali in charge. And there was kind of this consensus. Remember during the time of Umar ibn Khattab that it came down to basically between Uthman and Ali, a Khalifa had to be chosen. So once Uthman passed, it was kind of a known thing that, okay, the bay'ah should be given to Ali. And he was kind of the natural successor to the Khilafah at this point. Of course, he's the most respected companion of the Prophet ﷺ that's still alive. He was his cousin, his foster brother, his son-in-law. And he didn't just want to accept the nomination from the group that overthrew Uthman. Right? He didn't agree with the way that they were going about doing this. And they said, well, we're going to make you Khalifa. And he's like, well, I don't need your bay'ah. You're already in hot trouble here with what you've done. But there was a question that he had to struggle with, which is people on the streets wanted blood or revenge for Uthman's death. They said, Uthman has been killed, and we need the people to pay capital price for that we need them to be punished. Ali's opinion was this is true, and in fact, when he went to Talha and he went to Zubayr, two of the great companions, he said, will you give me the bay'ah? They said, yes, we will give you the pledge of allegiance to the Khilafah as long as you exact revenge on those that had killed Uthman. In other words, take his killers to task. He said, I will do that. I will go ahead and do that. However, in his mind, and perhaps rightfully so, he said that he needed to make sure that he consolidated his power first. So you have these different parts of the empire, right? And we'll talk about why one's blue and red. But he wants to make sure that the Muslims at large recognize him as the ruler. So he's going to consolidate power. Now what's really interesting is, if you look at, I just recently was studying this week, the life of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. And of course we know Salah ad-Din Ayyubi for the greatness that he was as a general, what he did in life, all of these things. And they write about him in non-Muslim books about how great he was as a ruler. What we of course, he liberated Jerusalem from the Crusaders. We know that that's what he's known for in 1089. But for 15, 20 years prior to that, what his daytime job was to consolidate power for the Muslims. So he ended up going and making sure that these different lands that had been under rulers, some of whom were Muslim, some of whom were not, came under one unified control. Once he was able to consolidate his power, then he could rightfully go and turn his attention to the Crusaders. Right? So this is oftentimes a political calculation that rulers have to make. And Ali ibn Abi Talib made the calculation that I need to consolidate this power from these different spheres before I go and exact revenge on others, right? To make sure everybody is together. One of those centers of power, as you'll see here, is Syria. Syria was under the governorship of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Okay, Muawiyah, as we mentioned in a previous class, one of the most skilled administrators that this ummah has seen. He was very good at the administration of and the governance that he had in this area. Keep in mind, by the way, Syria at this point is not Muslim. I shouldn't say not majority Muslim. So many of the people in that Byzantine part of Syria, they're just coming into Islam, or they may not be Muslim at all, and he's exacting kind of Muslim governorship around that area. The blue that you see here is under the governorship of Amr ibn al-As. Right? So these were two areas that Ali ibn Abi Talib knew that he's like, I need to go and make sure that I consolidate my power. There was a popular sentiment amongst the masses that the rebels should be punished. And by the way, Ali himself believed that too. It's not that he was against the punishment of the rebels. He did not agree with the murder of Uthman, for instance. Yeah. Muawiyah was particularly insistent that we need to take care of the rebels first before anything else can be done, just to quell the masses. Talha, Zubayr, Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala anha, she also believed this. We need to take care of the rebels. Ali, however, was not interested in furthering the bloodshed. He's like, this could end in a cycle of violence over and over again. Rebels, us, rebels, us, rebels, us. He's like, I'm not interested in that. So he's like, once we consolidate the Khilafah itself, then as a unified voice, we will take care of those who are trying to cause fitna. Instead, what he does, realizing that his base of operations and power is actually outside of Medina now, because there was so much strife inside Medina, he actually moves it to Kufa in Iraq. This is the first time that the capital of the Muslims moved out of Medina and it moved to Kufa. That's where he had a strong base of operations and supporters for him. I have on here just one of it. He was, by the way, Imam Ali, even now when you read his speeches, really, really eloquent, very eloquent, both in Arabic and even the translations of them. So this is one of his speeches that he gave. O Muslims, I call upon you to assist me in my program of reconstruction. God is a witness to my statement that my paramount objective is to restore justice in Muslim lands. Just as it is his wish that I do so. I shall not rest until I have destroyed injustice. Listen to this with attention. I shall not transgress the bounds of the book of God or anything. I will not be partial to anyone, whoever he may be. In my sight, all of you are equal. I shall promulgate the laws of God which are enshrined in his book, and I shall do so in the light of the precedents only of his messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the blessed one. This is just one of many, many speeches that he gave. Yes, did you have a question? Well, okay. We can take, why don't we do Q&A kind of at the end? I just want to make sure I get through the material, and then we can continue, inshallah. Okay, so the legacy of now obviously, as I mentioned on this previous slide, he rules for about 5 years, roughly, right? And during this time, there's all kinds of problems, right? So he's dealing with internal strife with the rebels, and for Ali, he did not believe that punishing the rebels was politically feasible at the time when his own khilafah was shaky. He also didn't, as I mentioned, he didn't want to further the bloodshed or the infighting. For his opponents, however, they didn't think you could unify the Muslim Ummahs until you took care of this issue with Uthman. Right? They wanted to fix the wrongs. They thought it would be sending the wrong message to do other than that. Eventually, in 656, supporting armies of the opposing sides met in a field near Basra in southern Iraq. Talha ibn Ubaidullah, Zubayr ibn Awam, hoping to avoid bloodshed, they met with Ali before the battle and they signed a peace treaty. Now, I was reading about this today, subhanAllah. Very interesting that both of them were adamant about initially fighting against Ali for the cause of Uthman. And then there was one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that they were reminded of that changed their opinion. Anybody know what that is? What that hadith was? Very interesting. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a rebel, like somebody who's not of the Muslims, would murder or would kill Ammar bin Yasir. Very strange. When you think about it, you're like, okay, that's kind of it's a prophetic saying that he would be murdered. Ammar bin Yasir, famous companion, would be murdered by a rebel. Ammar bin Yasir was in the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And when Ali reminded Talha and Zubair of this hadith, they quit their fighting and said, we will withdraw. Because they recognized that, wait a minute, if I'm on this side and Ammar's on that side, then we're in the wrong. We're not the ones, like it would be our army that would kill him, and that's not appropriate. So they actually withdrew and they stopped. That was part of the kind of peace treaty. But I just found it fascinating that these are, again, very pious men. When they're reminded of the words of the Prophet ﷺ, this is how much they took it to heart. So they did not want this type of fighting to happen, especially since it had only been 20 years since the death of the Prophet ﷺ, right? Just 2 decades. However, less pious people were much more extreme in their opinions. And they still kept urging people, on both sides, they kept urging people to fight. No, we need to fight, we need to consolidate power and all this stuff. So poor Ali is having to deal with having all these internal frictions and factions against him. And he's trying to consolidate his power. Talha and Zubayr are actually both killed in a particular battle, right? It was known as the Battle of the Jamal, or of the camel. It's written in our Islamic history. It's interesting because that battle had Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha as one of the generals, if you will. She actually came on a camel, and they originally said, go out there to show them that you're a mother of the believers so that they will calm the fighting down. Right? They'll see that the wife of the Prophet ﷺ is here, and they'll calm down their fighting. When she stood and got out there on the camel, it actually emboldened the fighters more, and they started fighting more, believing that Aisha is on their side. And so what ended up happening was the nexus of the fighting happened around the camel. Most of the bloodshed, and there's different estimates, but it was in the thousands and thousands of people that were killed in this internal civil war that was happening. Right? Some say 5,000 on one side, 5,000 on the other side. So on both sides, 10,000 people almost. Right? A lot of that was centered right around the camel area where Aisha although she was not hurt, and she was oftentimes protected. And in fact, eventually when she withdrew, after much bloodshed, when the battle stopped, Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, the same one that was on the side of the rebels, had now gone to Ali, and Ali said, go and take your sister home. Like, don't, just remove her from the battlefield, right? And she went. And for much of the rest of the time, she was no longer politically active until her death in 678 of the Common Era. She was a teacher, but she was no longer politically active after that. So this is some of the strife that Ali ibn Abi Talib is dealing with. It culminates in another battle that is recorded in our history that you can read about it in our books. It's called the Battle of Siffin, not to be mistaken with the Battle of Hittin. Hittin is later, much later, and that's during the time of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. But the Battle of Siffin was a battle between Muawiyah in Syria and Ali ibn Abi Talib's army. Again, both of them were fighting for what they thought was the right cause. One, to avenge the blood of Uthman, the other, to consolidate the power of the Khilafah. History, by and large, from a Sunni perspective, agrees with Ali, agrees that Ali's motive was the correct one, and that Muawiyah should have seceded and not fought back. But at that time, you had Sahaba on both sides that were very fervent about what they were doing. And again, I explained this in one of the first classes, right? We're still humans at the end of the day. And people still have to make human decisions and political decisions about what is and is not the right thing to do at a particular time. So what happens is they meet at Siffin. They end up after, I think it was 2 weeks of fighting, at least 10 days or so of fighting, they end up coming to a truce. And there's some arguments or some difference of opinion as to how it happened, but essentially they were accepted as, there was this reluctant acceptance to recognize Ali ibn Abi Talib as the Khilafah, as the Khalifa, right? Although some of Muawiyah's people did not have that same kind of opinion, if you will. From this battle, because of the negotiated terms of truce, there was a group that arose that became very extremist in our tradition, known as the Khawarij. And these people believed that no one was worthy of being a Khalifa and they should all be killed. Ali, Muawiyah, Talha, Zubayr, Talha and Zubayr had already died, but all of them. They were very extremist in their positioning and believed that anybody that committed any sin deserved to be killed. That's how extreme they were. Right? So these people, and by the way, it's very interesting because some of the narrations talk about how their Quran was so beautiful and they recited so eloquently and all of these things, but it didn't, as the Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith, it didn't go past their throats. It didn't affect their hearts. It didn't change them from inside. They were still extremists in their ideologies. And eventually, they would go, the Khawarij actually set out a plan to kill Muawiyah, Amr ibn al-As, and Ali ibn Abi Talib all on the same day. They succeeded in killing and murdering Ali. They did not succeed in murdering Muawiyah. And as such, he was praying Fajr in Kufa. An assassin comes and stabbed him, and that basically brought his rule to a complete end. The Khilafah fell to really the most powerful Sahabi at that point from a governorship perspective was Muawiyah. There will be some difference of opinion as to what happens after that, but essentially when Muawiyah eventually takes control, that is the beginning, that's the end of the Khulafa Rashidin and the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty that will rule the Muslim world for another 100, 150 years or so. And we'll talk more about that, inshallah ta'ala. Now, before I go into his reforms and contributions, Raheem? He was not. I have to check. He might have pledged to Hassan after, but I have to check. But he's still alive, yeah. So him and Muawiyah the assassination attempt didn't work, but it did for Ali, yes. Oh, he was with them, yeah. They were tied together. But they were both supposed to be killed, and neither one of them were. It wasn't, no, this is after. Yeah, Battle of Siffin had already been resolved, at that point. The Khawarij came out of that, and the Khawarij then said, we're going to kill them. Ah. And they murdered him. Okay. Yeah, that's true. There was the Khawarij, the battle in which most of them were killed. And the Khawarij were killed. So, okay, if we look at what he did, and I know we're running on time, so reforms, if we just look, again, lots of turbulence during the 5 years that Ali ibn Abi Talib was a Khalifa. One of the things that he did was he did dismiss many of Uthman's appointees. Right? So remember, this was a big point of contention with the rebels. Many of them were, he appointed new people in charge in those governorships. And many people began to see at this point that the Khilafah is more of a political authority, not a divine one. Remember at the time of Abu Bakr and Uthman and Umar, people saw that this was a political arrangement and a divine one in that they were considered the most knowledgeable of scholars too. At this point, however, it's kind of become much more of a political arrangement. Ali ibn Abi Talib himself was known for his zuhud. Right? Do you guys know what zahid is? It's somebody who's basically very, very ascetic. He lives a very simple life. He didn't live in pomp. He didn't live in a lot of wealth. And in a lot of ways, people would say that he's kind of given up the world. He was concerned more about his station with Allah, not his station with having and amassing wealth and all of these things. Nearly every, interesting just tidbit, nearly every Sufi order that would come up in Islamic tradition after this point traces his lineage somehow back to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Right? Again, known because he was so strong in his spirituality, that's what he was known for. And then he's also known as, again, preservation of the language of the Quran. Right? So Uthman ibn Affan did the script of it. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the language is what he's really powerful about. I mean, again, I've read some of his khutbahs in Arabic. There's one khutbah I remember reading. It didn't use the letter alif. You know how common alif is in Arabic? It's at the beginning of virtually every word or every sentence. It did an entire khutbah without alif, right? It's just, and again, I remember when I was studying with Imam Majid, he said, just to show you his mastery of the Arabic language was very, very strong, right? And that's seen in the preservation of the Quran, the language of the Quran being Arabic itself. Okay. We'll go ahead and end here for today. Next week, inshallah, or next time, what I want to actually discuss is, sorry about this, the development of Islamic law during the early period of the Caliphate. Because a lot of what we talked about is political, but what we don't realize is that on the ground what is happening at this time is fiqh, as we understand it, is starting to get established. Aqidah, as we understand it today, is starting to be established. Sharia is starting to be established. And we'll see and talk about next time about what the different phases of Islamic law and development. The formative phase, the phase of canonization and documentation, institutionalizing, and then even what role hadith would play, tawheed sciences, all of this, inshallah. We'll talk a little bit about the imams, and then we'll talk about even today the objectives of Islamic law and how we are to understand that. All of this, by the way, was happening on the ground with people. So there's political infighting that's happening at the top, but on the ground, people are interested in how do we preserve our deen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, inshallah ta'ala. Yes, Raheem. We'll probably do an introduction to them and then go into the Umayyads. Different rulers. So the red was Muawiyah, and the blue was, I believe, Amr ibn al-As. Yeah, Amr ibn al-As in Egypt, yeah. And green was Ali, yes. His base of operations, he had more supporters in Kufa than he did in Medina at that point. Because many of the people in Medina were related to or had an allegiance to Uthman, and they wanted blood. They were like, we need you to take advantage, we need you to exact revenge on the rebels. And he said, look, I need to consolidate my power. And the people in Kufa agreed with him on that. So he moved his kind of base of operations to Kufa. Good question. Oh, this one? This one, yes. Other questions or comments? By the way, guys, there's books and books that have been written about everything I just mentioned. So obviously, I just wanted to let you know there's a lot of details I left out, right? My purpose is to give you all a high level so that we can go into what's happening at the ground level, as I mentioned last time, right? So at the high level, there was a lot of turmoil, especially towards the end of Uthman ibn Affan's period and into Ali ibn Abi Talib's period. So there's a lot of turmoil politically. Again, you'll see what's miraculous about Islam is the way Allah has preserved it, even in spite of what's happening on the top. In spite of what's happening there, the preservation of our deen is something that is very active during this time period. Other questions or comments? No? Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. So my goal, inshallah ta'ala, is hopefully by next week we will be able to complete really the module on the Khulafa Rashidin. I've spoken with the organizers. we'll probably take a portion of the summer off from this class. That doesn't mean that we won't have halaqas here. I'm working with Brother Ibrahim to make sure that there is something available, but we'll likely restart our history from the Umayyad period. We'll probably restart that closer to the end of August into September, so that we'll have, as we get closer into the school year. Because I know there's a lot of people taking off for vacations and things like that in the summertime. Yes. Yes, please. That is my one way of communicating with everybody on this, so please do become part of the WhatsApp group, inshallah. We will have class next Sunday. Yeah, next Sunday we'll have class, inshallah. It will be likely after that we won't have class. Okay? سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.